How many times in your life have you cried out to somebody, "Save me"? Peter cried out those words. He was a grown man, but he felt himself sinking into that stormy water, and he was terrified and he was helpless, and he cried out to the one thing that could save him. He would have meant those words with all his heart. But most of us probably prefer to cry for help as little as possible. We don't like the feeling of needing to be rescued. Kids are more likely to shout out, "Save me." And they'll shout to be rescued because they think they're stuck on the jungle gym or something like that. And have you ever been the one called on to save a child and actually said, "No, you can do this yourself. You've got this. You've got this. You don't need me"? It's generally understood that we're not supposed to be helpless. And in fact, we need to learn how to not be helpless. And so we teach children to be strong and to be independent. And generally, we hold ourselves pretty strongly to that same standard. Culturally, North Americans tend to place a strong value on independence. We respect people who can get by and accomplish things on their own. We call them tough. And maybe we feel a bit like failures when it seems that we can't get by on our own. We want to be able to do life by ourselves if that's what we have to do. And maybe that's a bit like Peter getting out of the boat on his own and trying the impossible, walking on water on his own. It was not wrong that he tried to do that. And he even made it a little way over the water all by himself before he started to sink. And that, too, was not wrong. The idea of independence is closely connected with the idea of freedom, although the two are not exactly the same thing. And we know from the teachings of the new church that we need to be fundamentally free in order to have any real feeling that we're alive and that we matter. If we weren't free to make our own choices and act on our own choices, then what we want would be meaningless, in which case we would be meaningless. And so the Lord will not take away that fundamental freedom. We recognize instinctively that if we haven't chosen something, then it's not really a part of us. And we recognize also that if we don't do something when we could do it, then we haven't really chosen it. So it's fundamentally important that we make our own choices and that we be able to act on our own choices. And that's partly why we have this strong sense that independence is important. If we aren't able to do something on our own, by ourselves, then we can't do anything. We can't be anything. And that's particularly obvious when we look at small children. Kids go through these phases of wanting to do everything all by themselves. And they have to do that, because how else would they learn to tie their own shoes or brush their own teeth? And something of that same reflex lasts into adult life. When we start a new job, we don't feel that we've really taken ownership of it until we can do it without somebody looking over our shoulder. And the same dynamic applies to spiritual journeys or our spiritual work. though we're perhaps not as closely aware of that level of ourselves. If we care about our spiritual work, then that means we want to do it. And of course, that doing it means doing it ourselves. The disciple Peter represents faith. Faith is the beginning of spiritual life. It's our faith in what the Lord teaches, our faith in something good that He gives us that gets us up onto our feet to go and find that good thing. And nobody can make us have faith. The Lord could, but He never will. Nobody can make our choices for us. Our faith has to be our own, or we will have no faith. And so Peter got out of the boat by himself to go to his God, walking on the water. The storm that he walked through represents temptation. The angry, crashing water pictures the lies and the feelings that evil spirits try to crush us with when we come into spiritual temptation. The story also says that the Lord came to His disciples walking on the water in the 4th watch of the night, which is the last watch of the night, the last hours before the dawn. Those deep hours of darkness also represent temptation. When we look at the spiritual battles that we have to fight, when we see those spiritual enemies and see that they're standing in the way on the path we have to travel, what do we usually feel? A lot of the time it's not helplessness. Not at first anyway. A lot of the time we grit our teeth and we brace ourselves and we prepare to shoulder forward. It's easy to imagine Peter screwing up his courage as he stepped out of the boat. All of us have something in us that wants to be independent. All of us, when we enter into temptation, feel at first that we are supposed to cross the dark water to meet our enemies by ourselves, with our own power. And we can't do it. Peter walked a little way over the water. Whenever we start some new spiritual endeavor, we're able to stay on top of it for a little while. And then he found himself alone, away from the boat, away from anything that felt safe. And the wind was wild and the waves were so high, and he became afraid. And he started to sink. And then he did the one thing that could have helped him. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Faith is what gets us out of the boat to go to the Lord. And our faith has to be our own. If we don't feel that we're choosing to do something that we believe in, then the whole process is meaningless to us. And the journey of faith is the journey of learning to see that we need the Lord. We heard in the reading from Arcana Coelestia that when a person first starts to fight, he imagines that the goods and truths from which he fights are his own. And we heard that he cannot at the time know anything different. When we commit to becoming better people, we can't help but believe that we are doing that work ourselves. Because we made the commitment and we're doing the work. But what almost inevitably happens is that we do the work until we reach a limit. We do the work until we can't do it anymore. suddenly we're in a storm and the waves are too high. Everybody knows what it is to feel overwhelmed. Everybody knows what it is to feel that the work you have to do is just too much. We can make those hard times so much worse for ourselves by believing that we're failures if we have to ask for help. The truth is, we'll never overcome anything we're faced with without the Lord. We've never had any strength that wasn't the strength of the Lord present with us. In the teachings of the church, we're told that it is the Lord alone who fights for people who are in the combats of temptations and who overcomes. A person from his own power can effect nothing at all against evil or hellish spirits. For they're so connected with one another that even if one were overcome, another would rush in, and so on forever. They're like the sea that presses against every part of a dike. And if the dike should be broken, cleft, or a crack, the sea would never cease to burst through and overflow until nothing was left standing. So would it be with people unless the Lord alone sustained the combats of temptation within them. That sea pressing against the dike is like the sea surrounding Peter. We just can't do anything about it. We can't stop the ocean. But the Lord can. And we don't realize how much we need Him until we've tried to do it without Him. But when we do recognize that, when we find ourselves sinking, He is there. And beginning to sink, Peter cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus reached out His hand and caught him. The truth is that we need the Lord. No matter how strong or how wise or how brave we are, there will come a time when we find ourselves sinking. And we should never feel shame for crying out, "Lord, save me." The truth is that it's not only the Lord we need. We need the help of other people too. We're told that there are angels watching over every single one of us, and that without their incessant protection, we would be lost. And many of us have had experiences in this world that we know we couldn't have made it through without the concrete help of the people around us. But the point of these teachings isn't to drill home our helplessness. We do need to understand that we need the Lord, but it's not useful to dwell on the idea that we are helpless. We do need to also hold on to some of the empowerment we get from the knowledge that we are free. We are free to choose what we want. We are free to choose the promised land. And yes, we may need the Lord's help along the way, but we are free to get up and go there. The point is not that we're helpless. The point is that we were not designed to be alone. We were not designed to be silos. If independence means deciding what you believe is right and then having the courage to get up and do it, well, then independence is a good thing. But if independence means truly being self-sufficient, never needing help, never needing patience or tenderness from another human being, well, that's a myth. That sort of independence does not exist. We're not that strong. And besides, we were designed to share our life and our strength with one another. We're told that the Lord wants every good to be shared with everyone. And so in the next life, that's what happens. What you are and what you love will radiate from you to everyone around you. And what the people around you love will be shared with you. We're told the angelic state is such that everyone communicates his own blessedness and happiness to others. For in the next life, all affections and thoughts are communicated and perceived flawlessly. Each individual therefore communicates his own joy to all others, and so do all to each individual. And so each individual is, so to speak, the focal point of all. This is the heavenly form. The more there are to constitute the Lord's kingdom, therefore, the greater the happiness, for this grows in proportion to the increase in numbers. And this is why heavenly happiness is indescribable. We were designed to find joy in sharing what is good with everyone around us, in giving and receiving all at once. We are not islands. None of us are capable of finding real happiness on our own. That stony pride that calls itself independence does nothing good for us. That stubbornness that we can call self-sufficiency is no use to us or to anybody else. And those failures, when we couldn't make it on our own, don't have to be failures. They were moments in which we saw some of the truth about how small we are. But if in those moments we humble ourselves and ask for the Lord's help, failure can be turned around. Failure can become a strange and sudden calm. The triumph of our God who fights for us, who quiets the sea. If we ask the Lord to save us, we will be saved. He loves us with such a burning love that nothing could ever stop him. Nothing can stop the hand he reaches out to us. He says to us, "All power has been given to me in heaven and on earth. And lo, I am with you always." And if we find ourselves wanting to be less alone, wanting to find strength and support from the people around us, there is strength there to be found. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them. Amen.